What is up, internet? Welcome back to Beagle Eye Vision. We're going to be grinding some more Titan Quest here today, but I do have an announcement. We got sponsored by a website called Dubby. It's a drink for gamers. Dubby is an energy drink loaded with vitamins and nootropics. They formulated Dubby for anyone who wants to focus without jitters or a crash. Just mix one rounded scoop with 6 to 8 ounces of cold water and shake. So we're going to be doing another CubbyWhole episode. We are on number 10. And we are back in China at Titan Quest and trying to level up and get to the final boss. Again, I already killed him once, but I need to kill him again. So here we go.
What makes it such a hot topic issue is because we're talking about law. Who gets to be God? Who gets to be God's deputies? Who is the Most High? Who is the divine authority? It's all about the claim to the Most High. The only way that somebody can be higher than us is if we give away our power. Because there's nobody, we're all equal. But we're not equal in our knowledge, so ultimately I think it does have to be a hierarchy, but it has to be a cooperative hierarchy like a bee colony. It's about what our value system is, what we care about.
Hello, Hive Mind. Today is July 9th, 2020. I am your host, Nate Cap, joined by co-host Brandon Martin. Welcome to the 10th CubbyWhole podcast, where important topics are unveiled, discussed, and tested. Our website is CubbyWhole.com. That's CubbyWhole.com. On today's show, I'd say into the next shows, we'll be explaining or expanding on natural law, talking about moral relativism, justifications, apophysis, force versus violence, conscience, references of wrongs, references of rights, law of the jungle, solipsism, social Darwinism, and much more. And before we get into that material, Brandon is going to give us a short update on the Seed for Growth conference and what we can expect with that. So what's up, Brandon?
Since the C4 conference already happened, I'm going to skip over that. But I also forgot to mention that we have a code if you go to the website for dubby.gg, it's called, and use the code Beagle Eye Visions, you get 10% off. And their flavors are pretty good, so check them out. Let me try to find a spot.
So the Seed 4 conference is going on.
I'll leave a link for the website in the description of this video and also for the Seed 4 conference.
It's going to happen one way or another. So.
Oh, yes, no matter what. Even if the COVID actually extended and they still, bury us back down from getting that work out there.
Same here. So, since we're going to go deeper into natural law today, I'm going to give a little refresher to the episode 9, which I highly recommend listening to first if you haven't done so yet. I gave a basic breakdown of natural law, which is about inherent, objective, non-man-made, intelligent, and immutable conditions that govern the consequences of human behavior, our behavior. So we got into the apophatic method, which is apophysis. It's about understanding apophysis, meaning affirmation through negation, and how we can find out what a right actually is by simply understanding what actions are not rights because they cause harm to other sentient beings. And also, it's about how we can better understand moral relativism by understanding the opposite, which is natural law. And I also got into how the universe intelligently measures our every behavior so that we can learn our lessons. We can learn lessons. We can learn the lesson. And this is what really needs to be understood so that we can help ourselves and each other, learn that our behaviors of what we do, the ones that cause harm in this world, which are, they're governed by a law in the universe that gives us consequences to help us recognize what we are doing is wrong because it causes harm. And, I'm not trying to sound, extra redundant, but it's like, this really has to be said over and over again to really grasp what we're, trying to say. And it's really easy once you understand it. This whole show is one big solution-packed repository capsule. It's a continuation of the true apocalypse, which just means the great unveiling or revealing. And again, this information you're going to hear isn't anything new, and it's not owned by anyone, or it doesn't only have to be told by one person. This information is our human right, not only to know and have available, but to live by and share freely with others as well. This information isn't, some kind of religious dogma either, because religion requires belief. This knowledge does not. And there's a famous quote that I want to say before I hand it off to Brandon by Mikhail Bakunin. And he says, "The liberty of man consists solely in this, that he obeys the laws of nature because he has himself recognized them as such, and not because they have been imposed upon him externally by any foreign will whatsoever." And I really, really align with that quote and completely agree. So, Brandon, I'd like you to give us a breakdown of moral relativism and what that belief system leads to, because I believe that you're one of the best I've ever seen break that down, and I think you have a pretty good grasp on how it definitely does not lead to anything good. So if you want to, go ahead and give us what you got.
For sure, Nate. I just wanted to add in there that it's funny you use that quote, because I have that in my notes that I had brought to the show to use that same quote for this show.
Well, then
so
we both align with it, man. We both are on the same page, for sure.
Absolutely. Very, very synchronistic with that. But I do kind of want to say something a little bit more about natural law before I talk about moral relativism. The one thing I'd like to say is that natural law is a science. It's a science of morality, and it can be directly observed in the 3D realm. And the invisible workings of that science could be considered metaphysical or spiritual, being the causality of that science. Just like any of the laws in nature, they start in the invisible world and then they are manifested into the physical domain. And that's how we gather the evidence that's necessary to understand that this law is in effect, is by studying the effects that are manifested because of our behaviors and the consequences of our behaviors in the physical domain. It's very important to understand that this, like you said, is not religious. It's not based on belief. It is discoverable. It is knowable. And any individual can come to understand this by observing the world that they live in and the consequences of the behaviors that they do and that everybody does collectively all around them. So, it is a spiritual science in a way, if you really want to look at it that way.
Right.
So the evidence of the existence of natural law is the result, the the absolute result state which humanity receives as a direct consequence of the aggregate behavior of beings with the capacity of holistic intelligence, pretty much. So are we free? Are we not free? And how we come to understand whether we're free or not is, determined upon our level of consciousness, whether we can actually perceive and clear our minds to be able to understand what slavery and what freedom actually is. And I mean, this goes into the law of freedom, which is natural law. The law of freedom is natural law. And we do need to understand that as morality increases in the aggregate of any given society, morality increases in the aggregate of any given society. And then also as immorality increases in the aggregate of any society, slavery and tyranny and chaos increase in the aggregate of any society. And that's based on the aggregate behaviors of the beings with the capacity for holistic intelligence and the consequences of those behaviors into society, and what they're doing to other people, whether they're harming people or not. And I wanted to add one more thing there. A lot of people use the word harm, and I personally like to use the word violence. And the reason why is because harm can be very ambiguous. Mm-hmm. Now, it's very simple, and a lot of people will understand that, and that's why we use the word harm. I associate the word harm with violence. And what violence is to violate another being, obviously. And most people understand that violence is a wrongdoing. Even the people who falsely believe that self-defense is violence, somewhere in their head, they know that violence is a wrongdoing. So I like to say, what is a right? A right is an action that does not violate a sentient being in manifestation. So it does not violate any being. And it's not just about harm, because there are forms of harm in our world that are not necessarily violence. And it's something that I had to break down. And, I know that can get a little complex, but it is something I think we should understand, is that when we say harm, we are meaning violence. That's directly what we're meaning. Because, like I said, there are some forms of harm that are not necessarily violent. So I just thought I would give that little take about that. When it comes to, do you want to add anything to that, Nate?
Well, I mean, do you have any examples of harm that is not violence?
Yeah, I'm sure I could give some examples. Let's say a person consents to a certain activity being done. Let's say two beings go into a boxing match and an MMA fight, right? Mixed martial arts, okay? And they both consent to that activity where they know they are going to be harmed in the ring. They understand that harm is going to take place in that ring, and they both consent to that behavior knowing that. So when they enter into that engagement, they are not violating each other. There is no violence taking place there, but there is harm taking place there. One of them, actually maybe both of them, are being harmed physically. And that is not a form that is against natural law. That is in alignment with natural law, because they both are intelligent, they are consenting, they are of the age of reason, and they have the ability to consent, consciously and reasonably to that behavior, and nobody's coercing them into doing that. Nobody is, holding a gun to their head and saying, you have to do this, or anything like that. So that's a great example of a behavior that is harmful, that is nonviolent.
Right. Very well said. And I really like that you got into harm, when it comes to natural law. It's a violation. It's not just a harm, it's a violation, and then that's violence. And, I think that's really, really, really important to understand, especially when we get into, the difference between violence and force. So if you want to,
Absolutely.
You can extrapolate on that too.
Well, yeah, I mean, violence is a behavior that is manifested that destroys another being's rights or their well-being, their liberties, their ability to express their own freedoms without doing harm, or without violating anybody. So it's the wrongful application of force. And force is the ability to generate change in society or in creation that is rightful. Like when you're using force properly, that is, when you're in alignment with it and you're looking at the positive uses of that energy or that dynamic, right? So force is the ability to create change that does not violate another being. But the abuse of that force, the negative use, would be violence, where you're taking force and you're actually using it to destroy somebody else's freedoms.
Yeah, man. I also hear a lot of people who, I mean, it's just because our language is so just messed up, and, a lot of words are obfuscated, and I believe violence is definitely one of those words because, people will say that if if somebody pulls a knife on you and tries to, stab you, and you pull a gun on them, then, that's violence. But, if you want to, you can give people a little bit of an understanding of how that is not violence, and that it's a, direct use of force or, self-defense.
Right. So force goes into self-defense. Self-defense is a form of force. And self-defense is only legitimate when one has been initiated with violence. So if you're on the street and a thug comes up to rob you, they pull a gun or a knife on you like you're talking about, they have initiated violence towards you. They are accosting you with coercive forms and behaviors, or the abuse of force, like I was saying. And at that point where they have initiated and accosted you, you now have the right to defend yourself and your well-being, your liberty, and your loved ones, because they're trying to steal or murder or do any of the other harmful behaviors, which coercion in itself is a harmful behavior. And this is really crazy because they are so egotistically identified with the thing that they're trying to take from you that they would even risk their own lives to do that, because they are so identified with things like money and materialistic possessions that they would go out and risk their own lives and somebody else's well-being to actually get that materialistic thing. Because, I mean, you walk up to people on the streets nowadays and you're likely to get shot. More people are carrying guns now than ever, and you're very likely to get shot. And I still hear about cases that are going down like this. And that person who pulled that gun out and shot the accoster, if it was necessary in that scenario, then he is completely in the right. So we have to understand that self-defense has to do with necessary. One thing I like to say, like, if a little kid comes up and kicks you in the shin, is it necessary to, react abnormally with an abuse of force towards them? I would call it an abuse of force. Like, what degree of self-defense do you use against that child? Right. This is something that we philosophically talk about at my house a little bit. Is it necessary to kick that kid in the shin, or is it necessary to put that kid down with a bullet? No, it's not necessary, obviously. So you have to gauge what is necessary, but it goes all the way up to equal and deadly force. If they're threatening your life with a gun, with a firearm, you have the right to use equal and deadly force against that person. A lot of people don't like to hear that, but it is a right, and it has nothing to do with violence. Violence is the initiatory abuse of force. It is all about who started it when it comes to violence. So like when you're in the schoolyard and two kids get into a fight, the kid who started the fight is the one who is the most morally culpable for that behavior, and is the one who has initiated violence. Wrong, all violence is wrong, but initiated a wrongful action towards another being. And unfortunately, we still see in schools today that it doesn't matter to the teachers, that they'll say, oh, both kids are in trouble. It doesn't matter. You were participating in the fight. They want you to be pacifists when it comes to that. Self-defense is completely out of the picture. Don't ever use self-defense, because in their mind, they think that self-defense is violence. They think it's the same thing, and they're wrong. They're absolutely wrong, and they're brainwashed for thinking that.
Right.
They need to realize that self-defense is the rightful use of force, and it's one of nature's oldest laws, actually. It is one of nature's oldest principles that beings have the right to defend themselves when they are wrongfully accosted in the manifestation,
Absolutely. I think this is one of the reasons why there are so many people in this world who, don't fight back, or they're always calling for someone else to come protect them. And they feel that they have to, because they feel like if they don't, then they're going to get in trouble for, fighting back or shooting back or stabbing back, because they feel like, they're going to, everybody has the fear of prison. They have the fear of, law enforcement coming to take them away and take all their things and basically destroy their whole life just because they fight back. And so that's why a lot of people don't fight back. And, that's why, little kids, they have no problem with fighting back, because, their consequences are, well, you might get, a day of detention, or, go to your room for a day or something. And it's definitely the principle of self-defense is definitely beat out of us. And, I really like what you said about being conscious of how you react with what force or what violence has come at you. And I think that's very critical, because, obviously if someone, pulls out their, wants to, fight you with their fist, you're not going to just pull out a gun and shoot them, because you're abusing your right of self-defense and force. And,
right.
That wouldn't make
I want
any
to add
sense.
to that what you just said. Unless it's necessary, they may be capable of killing you. Like, what if it's a big guy and you're a really small guy, or a really small old lady, and you have to pull a gun out to put that person down? Well, then, yeah, it's necessary. Like, my grandmother, she's not going to be able to defend against a group of guys that come to her house just with their hands to beat her down.
Right.
But if she has a shotgun, they're not going to be wanting to do that. She's going to come out on her porch and, blast them away pretty much.
Right.
And I mean, they're ignorant for even trying to do that when an old lady has a shotgun like that. But it's just ridiculous, because, like you said, there's an intelligent way of gauging what is necessary and what is not, when it is necessary and when it is not. And what helped me with this was actually because I took a lot of different types of martial arts when I was younger. I took Kempo, and I took Kung Fu for a while, and I took some pressure point classes also. And this is something they teach you in martial arts is, you want to put your enemy down with the necessary amount of force that is needed to prevent further harm from occurring, And if it is needed to prevent further harm from occurring, that you actually have to take a life, which is unfortunate, yes, it is. But if it is needed, then yes, you are capable of doing that. And a lot of people wouldn't like hearing that. Not that I'm saying, hey, I want people to go take lives or anything like that. I'm not advocating for that, but I am saying it is a right. There is a right to actually kill somebody, which is different than murdering somebody. Killing is a right. Murdering is a violation. It is violence.
Right. Yeah. And premeditated as well. But yeah, it's, I think this is one of the things that is so important to just remember, that force is you could look at it as the positive aspect of a altercation. and, a violent altercation. And then, of course, violence being the negative, which is the initiative part of the altercation. So who starts it is, the one who is causing the violence, and you will be possibly met with force, and it could be deadly force. And I think that's it's extremely important to understand that, and to not get, violence and force mixed up with each other, or confused with each other.
Right. Another way we could put this and define it, right, as like a working definition for these two things. Force is the capacity, the moral capacity to generate and initiate physical change, right?
Right.
It's an action that does not violate another sentient being or their natural rights. Actions which one always possesses. It's an action that we always possess the right to take, is what I mean, which includes self-defense. So these actions never result in the destruction of freedom. Therefore, these actions are always in harmony with natural law. And contrary to that, violence is the capacity to generate the immoral initiation of physical change, the immoral initiation of harmful behavior or actions that are in opposition to another sentient being's natural rights. So there are actions that one never possesses the right to take because they destroy something which they do not own. It's something that they do not own. It doesn't belong to them. Other beings don't belong to them or anybody, and you don't have the right to infringe upon their liberties at any time. You don't ever, forever. And it will always be that way 100% throughout all time of the entire manifested reality that we live in. It will never change. So they're actions that always result in the destruction of freedom. Therefore, these actions are always in opposition to natural law.
Right. Yeah. And, speaking of alignment, it's about being aligned to natural law through right action, the good behavior. So, when imagining how to align with natural law, I liken it to, like the flow of river, like the river current. Let's say the flow of the river is strong in this case, plus it's, over 3 feet deep. And let's say the direction of the flow of the river represents what a right is. And then the opposite direction represents wrong action. Well, if you're attempting to walk out into the middle, you'll have a way higher chance of going in the right direction if you let yourself flow in the direction of the current, which represents a right, or what a right is. And now, if you decide to try and go against the current, then you'll be met with extreme force, and you'll more than likely be swept off your feet or pushed down by the heavy current. And I look at this as, like instant karma or consequence. And that's, that's my short analog or metaphor. But it's like, it's just, like that is, when you talk about force, you're going with the force of the current to the right way. But, if you're going up against the force, I'm using that as a metaphor of like going in the wrong direction. And, it's like I would look at that as like the violation part.
Right. When applied to humans, yeah, definitely.
Right. When applied to humans, yeah, that's what I meant.
Yeah. No. I completely got your, analogy there. It's very well said, and I agree with that 100%. The reason why I kind of led up to this, instead of just jumping right into moral relativity, is because we need to understand the difference between force and violence, because moral relativism is a form of a justification to allow violence to take place at the whims of somebody's perception. And what I mean by this is moral relativity is the idea that you yourself get to play God, and you yourself get to decide that your behavior and the consequences of your behavior are either a right or a wrong. not that it's set in stone by the effect that has actually taken place in manifestation, that you did a wrong behavior to somebody, you stole something from them, you violated them in some form or fashion, and you don't want to admit because you're scared or because of ego or brainwashing or whatever it might be, you don't want to admit that you did a wrong deed, that you have done harm to somebody. So you say, it's a right to me, I get to make it up because I'm God. I get to play God here, and I get to determine what right and wrong is. So I stole from this guy who has done nothing wrong in any form or fashion towards me, and I have taken his property from him unrightfully, and now I'm saying, well, that's my right to do so. It's my right to go out and do that behavior. And that's what moral relativity is simply. It's the idea that you get to make up, you get to justify wrong behaviors whenever you want. You get to excuse your behaviors whenever you cause harm and just magically manifest this idea that there was no harm. And it kind of does go into a solipsistic ideology because it gets you in this idea, like I said, a God complex where you think that you get to control everything, that you own everything. You own the way that the laws are manifesting these consequences in reality, which is solipsistic in a way, in my point of view, because you're pretty much saying, like, you know, I am God of everybody, and all it takes is one more little step to say nobody else actually exists. They're all just a figment of my imagination, so I can do this anyways, because morality is completely relative to my perception. And it's completely hogwash. And we know this. Like, we know objectively, inherently, that rape is a wrong deed universally. No matter where you go, it doesn't matter what culture you were raised in, what background, what race, it has nothing to do with that. And people, I still hear people to this day that say, well, if you're raised in this culture, or even some tribes, like this tribe over here, they accept rape as normal, you know, but it's just fine to go out and do that. And it's like, no, it is not okay, because you're destroying somebody else's freedom. And one of those people is a victim, meaning that one of those people do not want that behavior to be done upon them. They do not accept that, and they will, maybe they're conditioned into believing that that behavior is okay, but just because you raise a kid to think that pedophilia is okay its entire life doesn't mean it's okay. Just because you raise a kid to believe that rape onto them is okay doesn't mean it's okay. It will objectively forever remain an immoral action, and that's a universal law set in stone.
Yeah, exactly. And it's something, you know, I want to touch on here because I hear this from a lot of people where, you know, for instance, you talked about, you know, like solipsism, you know, being like playing God, right? Well, some people will say, well, that's if you believe in God, right? What do you have to say to people who say, well, that's if you believe in God, that, you know, those things, or, you know, that, you know, you can just make these things up, or, you know, make up rights and, you know, tell everybody what a wrong is.
Well, it's an interesting thing. I've ran into that a couple times talking to people, and I just ask them usually, well, what else is it? You're the single individual that's claiming that you get to create all other things from your mind only. Your monad individuality creates all things. What else would you call that? Is that not a God complex? Is that not saying that you're the divine creator of all things in your reality? I mean, you got to be completely illogical to not see how that is what a concept of a God actually is correlated to. So, you know, I would just answer back with the question, like, what else can that be? Whether you believe that or not is irrelevant to what you're actually, you know, doing is what it comes down to. Your belief is irrelevant. Like, what you're actually doing because of that it hurts people. It causes harm onto people, which you don't have the right to do. So whether you believe in that or not doesn't matter.
Right. Yeah, it's really interesting to hear people say, I'll say, what do you think created the laws of the universe? Like, what created gravity? And, they'll agree that something created it, which then indicates that there is a creator behind it. So, it's an interesting thing. But nevertheless, I'm just, I think that it's really important for people to, be honest with themselves with things like that. And,
Right.
And,
I have something to say to that. First thing is, I think that's a great topic to open up in a future podcast.
For sure.
The ideas of atheism. But I like to approach people like this with deductive problem solving. So the way I do this is by saying, okay, as an atheist, you believe in logic, you believe in math, you believe in things that are orderly. And this doesn't necessarily have to do with the God idea, but this is just something I approach them with. Because usually atheists believe that everything is chaos, that there is no such thing as order, there is no such thing as something that is in a pattern or that creates an orderly state, which is what natural law could be defined as also, something that gives us order, right? So they're actually contradictory at their presuppositionals because they're using logic to try to come to that conclusion. And their logic is flawed, but they're still believing in something which is giving them an orderly outcome, which is trying to get them to the truth. Just like math, math is there to give us an orderly answer to a problem, to a question. And yet they still sit there and say, well, there's no such thing as order. So it's contradictory at that suppositional idea where, you're saying, hey, I don't believe in order at any level. I don't believe in natural law. I don't believe in these things. But then simultaneously, you're using something that is supposed to give you a correct answer, which is based in order. It's based in logic. And another thing to this is that people who are materialists, they use something that is metaphysical or metamaterial, which is something that is beyond the material. And that is logic. You're using things that are metaphysical to actually come to those conclusions, wrong conclusions, that is, but they're still using that. So their ideas are fundamentally flawed and contradictory at the suppositional concept. So they suppose that this is something, but they don't actually live through that conclusively. They're not living through that to its fullest conclusion, being that they're not taking a step back. This goes into something we talked about before with truth. People who say there's no such thing as truth. Well, is it true that there's no such thing as truth? Well, if it is true, then obviously there is such a thing as truth. If it's not true, there's obviously such a thing as truth. You end up in the same place every time, so
Yeah, I love that way of questioning because what it's like the Socratic method, pretty much, right?
Yes.
It's something that I definitely have been trying to use more because I feel like it's the best way to get people to, not get upset with me and more so just really come to a conclusion within their self. And, that way it's them that they're facing rather than, me being the bad guy. And I think that it's definitely something that I really want to get further into with you in the future for sure.
Definitely. It sounds great. That math thing really blew me away when I first understood it. Math is definitely pretty much an immaterial thing that we study through the material, but the concepts of math are immaterial. They're metaphysical. So maybe we can open that up. I don't want to get too sidetracked here. To kind of go back to moral relativity, what I like to call moral relativism is the destroyer of all freedom. I like using that when I talk to people because it really hits them deep in their gut and in their heart. you know, and might not be able to pierce their mind yet, but intuitively and subconsciously it gets them, and I can see it in their eyes when I tell them that it is the destroyer of all freedom, you know. And the reason why is because people can arbitrarily decide, you know, what is a right and what is not a right, what is a wrong and what is not a wrong. So any society that enshrines moral relativity will never see freedom. It's an impossibility, because you're going to have people that run around, and just like what we're doing today. That's where we're living. We're living in a society that is more completely hedonistic and morally relativistic. And hedonism goes in with this, because they just want to feel good rather than understanding that they have done wrong and they need to atone for that behavior through some type of reconciliation, some type of true apology, where both parties were the initiatory of the violence. The person who has committed the violence has actually said they're sorry and stopped the behavior that has caused harm and does not do that behavior anymore. But any society that actually, you know, believes in moral relativity, believes that there's really no such thing as objective right and wrong. They believe that culture gets to tell you what right and wrong is, that perception gets to tell you what right and wrong is, which is absolutely incorrect. They actually believe that they can arbitrarily create or decide what those things are for themselves, you know, so that they can get out of the consequences, which you can never escape the consequences. And we see that today. That's why they're building up so massively and so repetitively all these negative energetic forms that we're coming in contact with all the time. So yeah, I mean, it's the destroyer of all freedom, and it's completely impossible to have true freedom in a society that embraces that ideology. And if you want an example of that, just open your eyes and look around you. We can't have freedom by continuing to live the way that we are living currently. We have to understand natural law principles, because that is what's going to actually give us the ability to meet the requirements in reality, in the manifested reality, to manifest, to create that condition of freedom.
Right. I couldn't agree more. And it's definitely, you know, it's not something that's religious. It's common sense. You know, it's about understanding that if we want to make the change and to lessen the wars and lessen the harm and the violence in the world, we have to make the change within ourselves. We can't point the finger at some, you know, politician to make changes for us. You know, there's no such thing. That doesn't exist. And it exists in illusions, but the truth is that, you know, like I said, it's this common sense, which, you know, obviously, you know, when you understand the word conscience, you know, the word conscience, when you break it down in Latin, it means con is together, and science breaks down to sciare, which means to know, and then that, you know, that breaks down to common sense, because it means right behavior or the difference between right behavior and wrong behavior, then consciously being able to, you know, take right action over wrong action. And that is what we have to get to individually in the aggregate if we want to see real and positive change, if we want to see true freedom and not a whole bunch of safety and, you know, people being afraid to fly on airplanes because they're afraid of the boogeyman, like, you know, someone from the Middle East, or, you know, the new pandemic boogeyman and everybody's eyes and mouths, and, you know, so where everybody's wearing masks all the time. It's just we're going into a world of total madness. I think we're already there, but I'm just saying, like, you know, we're going into a place where it's like, you know, we're not going to be able to, you know, turn this around if we don't start to learn and get back to principles, get back to values, get back to understanding that there really is a objective difference between right and wrong behavior. And once we understand that, then we'll understand how not only it's not a religion and that moral relativism is the cause of slavery in this world on all levels, spiritually and physically, mentally. Well, once we figure that out, we will start to see a progression. We will start to see a progression towards what we truly, really want. And that's to live an honest life, to be a good person, and to, not cause so much chaos and harm in the world.
All right, we're going to take a break right there. We will be right back. And don't forget about that coupon code. Get 10% off at w.gg.